Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins. A real pleasure to be joined by Semih Altinay. Semih is the Vice President of AI Solutions at Phrase, and he leads AI strategy and innovation initiatives that are certainly helping organizations scale their multilingual content, improve their localization workflows, and certainly we'll be talking a little bit about unlocking new opportunities through AI. Semih, great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. So let's get right into it. There's an awful lot to talk about. Semi AI, it's reshaping the world. It's every aspect of global content seems to be changing, whether it's content creation, whether it's localization. So, from your perspective, let's start there. What are you seeing as the most significant changes organizations are maybe experiencing today? And
Mhm.
where do you think that AI is delivering maybe some of the greatest value right now?
Good question. I think the biggest shift is AI is no longer just doing translation. Obviously, going back decades, we had different types of machine translation models with neural models coming out about 15 years ago. That was kind of this incredible thing. But it was always, hey, can we just translate large amount of content with, AI, right? With MT. And I use these interchangeably because I feel like everybody acts like we just invented AI now, but AI has been around forever. And even in our industry, neural machine translation is still AI, right? But now I think what's happening is something different. There's this interesting language intelligence life cycle as we talk about. It's like it's no longer just translation, but it's intent proximity. How close can AI get the translation output to be as close to what I'm intending, what my audience needs to see? I feel like that's the biggest shift now because AI now has tools that it never had before. You can actually provide us context. Old AI was fast and cheap and shippable, but now we're talking about the style guides. You could talk about kind of like AI judges, the terminology. There are just so many additional things that are happening now. So it's like context, then the AI models, because we have different models that can do different things, evaluation, transformation, the entire workflow change. I see that's the biggest difference between, what was there in the past and, versus now.
And it's certainly changing very quickly. And I wanted to
Mm.
ask you about that because there's an awful lot of discussion, as you will know very well, about AI replacing, let me call them traditional workflows, traditional ways of doing things. But there are many experts, Semi, who maybe see AI as this enabler rather than a replacement. So, what do you think about when you think about the relationship between the human expert, if I can phrase it that way, and AI, and how do we see this changing over the next number of years, particularly obviously talking about localization and content creation?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. AI is an enabler, but roles also constantly change. So in this AI saturated world, what I always go back to is this, to be honest with you. It's like people buy from people. You still want to see there's a person at the end of this thing, but can just AI eliminate a lot of the noise, a lot of the things that happen in between? What goes away really is that repetitive content, the high volume, low risk work. I feel like that can pretty much go away with a lot of the capabilities with AI today. What grows now is that the definition of good. What does good mean to you, right? What does good mean to the end users also? So curating context, reviewing high stakes content, owning the outcomes, that still needs to happen by humans. But the more tools they have at their disposal, the likelier that they're going to achieve that goal, especially at scale. That's the biggest thing. We've never been in a situation where there's this much content being created all the time. It's no longer just like, here's my app content, like maybe strings for a mobile app. Here's my web content. Here's this ad campaign, whatever is happening. Now there's literally like 20 different types of content, audio, video, text, ephemeral content, like permanent content, user generated content. There's just so much happening. So I think we're enabling humans because AI is able to take a lot of that burden now, but it is not just about the low touch, the repetitive content, it is now high touch, high profile content. AI is also helping there too. So it's definitely shifting things like you still need, translators and the interpreters in the real world, they're still adding value. But is it that same stuff that they used to do back in the day, just looking at segments and trying to make the best translation? Or is it beyond that? Is it just identifying whether this particular translation hits the spot, right? Hits that the intent. And I think that's where the human credibility is the differentiator.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And it's interesting because I've been asking a lot of people recently about is AI actually helping them or not? And it just leaving it open and seeing what people say. And it is an enabler, as we touched on a few moments ago. People are certainly being able to be more productive. But then there's also another part of the audience who are saying things like, I've never had so much work. It's just creating so much work. And as you were saying, there's content everywhere. Now, I wanted to ask you about what that means for agentic AI and agents, because we seem to be now managing not just humans, but also agents. And we need some human expertise to manage agents, I think. So, with agentic AI, Semi, being one of the most talked about at the moment, anyway, developments in this sort of AI journey we're all on. From your perspective, as you look at it, what are the opportunities? What are the AI agents helping with when it comes to creating, I suppose, a wider global content operations model?
Mhm.
What challenges maybe do companies need to think about in this agentic way of working? And what should we be thinking about if we're in this cycle of constantly uh, improving or growing these autonomous systems?
First I'm going to touch on one thing you said right at the beginning of that paragraph. You said we're finding ourselves working a lot more. You and I talked about this a while ago, where we're supposed to have all these AI agents and all these tools, Claude here, Codex there, and all this stuff, right? But then we're working doubled now. It's like we got our daytime jobs, and then we go home and we kind of figure out some really cool stuff that will help us either at work or maybe we're doing some work sanctioned stuff with AI agents. I'm sure my CEO Georg would agree with this because we were having that conversation too. Sometimes you stay up till 2 a.m. doing stuff because it's just one, you're doing things you never had capabilities to do before. So I think that's fun. And two, you're genuinely excited to do this thing because you're creating content or you're creating workflows, whatever you're doing. You just couldn't do this stuff before. And for especially non-technical users, I feel like this is this incredible era. I compare this to honestly the creation of the internet or the .com. Like, yes, there's a lot of fads out there. There's some companies being created that just don't add a lot of value. They're just wrappers for LLMs, but there's genuinely good work that's happening. So that's number one. We're working more, I feel like, which is the funny side of it. But on the business, for the localization industry, I would say like we're moving from automating tasks. That's what we were using a lot of these tools to automating entire processes. Like, yes, I can stay up till 2 a.m. and I can kind of play around with Claude, but then I can also get so much stuff done while I'm sleeping. I can have little agents running and doing things in the background, or I can have an agent that's organizing my computer. Things that I couldn't find before, I can just go and find it really fast. I was talking to a law firm partner friend of mine, and I explained how I used Claude to do all these things on my computer. He's like, by the time you explain it to me, wouldn't it be easier for you to do it? And I thought about it, maybe, but the point was that I could do other things while it's doing all of that other stuff. Maybe it's 30 minutes. Maybe I had to prompt it for 5 just to save 25 minutes. But the point is, I could go do something else while it's figuring things out. So I feel like that's what's happening in our industry as well. It's like, how do we figure out automating entire workflows, breaking silos between different departments too, because it was all kind of disconnected. Marketing is doing its own thing, HR is doing something else. And then you got the local teams obviously trying to bridge the gap. So I feel like those silos will be broken with the AI agents. And the overall opportunity, I think, is that the agents run this workflow end to end, right? And they can escalate if there's an escalation, but you now have one platform every team, every agent, all in one place. The challenge, obviously, is guardrails, the quality criteria. Like, again, I touched on it earlier, but what does intent mean to you? What does quality mean to you? Those are important, and different types of content require different guardrails. Observability is another thing. One of the nicest things that I saw from one AI tool to the other was the second one, when I first used it, it started telling me what it's doing and why. If your systems cannot explain that, then it's difficult, right? It's a black box. It kind of creates distrust. But if it's telling you, or it's showing you things, or you have observability over the content, over what's happening, then obviously you're going to have more trust. So be safe to, I would say, like, have a safe way to deploy AI. We sometimes help our customers with forward deployed engineers if they can't figure things out. Sometimes there's partners that come in and help us integrate in a particular way. But our goal is to make sure that our customers can set up that agentic workflow end to end and just making sure that there's autonomy. But don't assume it, right? Don't start with the riskiest content. Make sure that you're starting with what's measurable, what you can kind of trust with it, and then little by little you can expand it.
No, I think that's good advice because I like you, I'm sure, and like many people, constantly see a screen that says you've used up all your tokens for this session, and we all hover over the buy more buttons, and credit cards are getting used because people are certainly burning through tokens, and there is a level of experimentation that's required. But I love what you're saying about ultimately, I think where we end up is it has to be aligned to your business objectives, right? Otherwise, you're just playing with AI and agents. And once you start mapping it to the workflows, that's where it gets really interesting. And of course, it's not always perfect. You've got to keep an eye on this stuff. But I want to come back to something that you've mentioned a few times, which is this sort of uh, language intelligence, this sort of
Mhm.
content requirement to engage, because we all know that translation, it's not enough just to, have an accurate translation and for that to create the meaningful engagement with the customer or the end user. So this cultural intelligence, it's still a big differentiator in the AI landscape. And is this where you see the humans and the experts and the linguists having the biggest impact, or what do you think about in that scenario, Semi?
Mm. Yeah, I used to say like no one cares about translation. It's this cost center, blah blah blah. I don't say that anymore. And I used to say that in the context of executives because I feel like we, as the localization industry professionals, didn't create enough value behind translation. But now I'm going to say something different. I'm going to say that no one really buys translation, right? Translation is just it's just a vehicle. They buy content that moves people. I'm thinking about all the most creative ads, right? By Apple, by Nike, by, so many amazing organizations that really put out content that moves people. And it's oftentimes that is the feeling that people are looking for, not necessarily translation. So they're not going to buy because of the translation, but it is a vehicle. Fluency is now table stakes. Intent proximity is the differentiator. AI will nail fluency, I don't know, like a nice fluid translation that's consistent in 20 languages, but if it doesn't really tell you if it's going to land or not, if your message is going to land or not. Quality is table stakes, right? The businesses, they care about intent and outcomes, but you just don't know where kind of the things fall apart. We had just a conversation today internally for an enterprise customer that's saying, well, I just want to achieve this one thing. That's all I care about. And it's really people come in and they see this dynamic content and they leave within seconds. They're trying to figure out why, right? Why isn't it landing? Is it the translation quality? Is it something else? Is it overall user experience? But like there's this cultural intelligence that plays into all of this too. Say that I create, let's just say I have an automobile that I'm selling. It's the same automobile, same car, same model, same year. There's a different way to market it to the, let's say, the Japanese market versus the Swedish market. They look for different things. And maybe you look at a culture like Russia versus, I don't know, Spain. Different cultures, identify with different things. And once you understand that, you say, oh, one marketing material that may get translated into 20 languages is not going to cut it. Maybe this marketing material itself has to transform across different cultures. That I think is going to be the key, especially now. Like AI can take the volume, but the cultural judgment is going to become more valuable.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because I actually wrote an article very recently. Now it had a bit of a title that certainly caused a little bit of a stir, or certainly got some attention, and I called the article "Nobody Buys Translation or Localization Services." Uh,
Mm.
so, of course, I would name it something like that, being in marketing. But the bottom line is, I think customers they prefer they're buying actual revenue growth, or they're trying to buy faster market entry, or they're trying to buy a better customer experience, or it's regulatory compliance, or it's product adoption in a particular country, culture, community, etc. And obviously, the translation and localization have been sort of the vehicle that's got us there. But there's a wider view here, I think, now with AI, because the localization teams have traditionally been viewed as maybe more support functions. I think you were kind of hinting at that. And there's this growing recognition that they can directly contribute now to business growth. So, how do localization leaders, how do they better demonstrate their value to a wider organization that's obsessed with AI right now? And how do they become better strategic contributors, Semi, when it comes to revenue or customer engagement?
That's right there. That's the key. That I've been talking about this for years, and maybe you put that thing in the back of my mind, by the way, when you said no one buys translation. Maybe I read that, and subconsciously it's in my brain now. But the revenue generation aspect of localization is the key that we all, as an industry, need to focus on. Look, otherwise, again, I want to be controversial too. I've been saying this stuff for years. To procurement, you're no different than toilet paper. They will go for the volume at the cheapest cost. They don't care, right? So the minute that we start talking about per word pricing, per minute pricing, whatever it might be, we're losing that battle. We've been losing it for years. It's a race to the bottom. What we got to do now is talk about how localization actually moves to the business side. I know there's organizations out there that have been talking about this for a few years, but I feel like I don't know if it's the introverted nature of our industry. I don't know if it's maybe we just expect people to understand how important language is because we have this passion, but for executives, it is not enough. It is a trap. We're always measured on this cost, right? Again, like per word, whatever it might be, and we got to tie it to outcomes. I'll give you a very specific example. So last year I spoke to somebody and they're trying to increase their market adoption, right, in given markets. But when I first started talking to this person, the head of localization in a company, I said, what are you trying to achieve? Oh, well, we're trying to translate all this different content. I'm like, no, 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 not that. Like, what are you actually trying to achieve as a business? Oh, well, we're trying to do X, Y, Z. I'm like, beyond that, what is your company's OKR, right? Objectives and key results for 2025 at the time last year. And he actually had to think for a minute. It's like, you know what? I actually don't know how we support that, but this is what we're trying to. I'm like, that organizational goal is what we focus on. What we do then is we say, here's what the company is trying to achieve and work backwards. Here's how language will enable that. In fact, people are seeing this now. People are seeing that it's not just about getting the content, translating it just so you have it in different languages, but rather if, for example, gamers want to see their content, the games in their language, they love it. They're more immersed. If they, watch a movie with subtitles in their own language or it's dubbed in their language, they're more immersed. So I feel like those are the conversations that we need to have. And if you don't know how to tie the value to the, organizational goal, literally you can look at if in the US, when it's a public company, you can look at your 10K submissions, right? SEC, you have to, present your company's financials every year. Europe has an equivalent of that as well. The point is, even in those conversations, you will see the revenue breakdown. Here's where it was last year, US versus outside the US, or Europe versus Asia, or whatever it might be. And here's where it is now, or how it's evolving. The minute that you see that international customers or international revenue is increasing, that right there is one indicator. It's not all of it, but if you have customer scores, we have one customer that did a really cool case study last year where they said, it's not just the speed, it's not just the quality, it's not just the whatever, but it was the customer satisfaction scores that increased. That was a mind-blowing moment for me. For the first time ever, I have a customer that's not talking about cost savings or speed. They're now talking about customer satisfaction scores among their own clientele. So I feel like those are the conversations that we need to have. Otherwise, we are risking extinction, right? There's always pressure from the executive teams to just go find some AI tool that will do it all. And maybe we don't need localization teams. Maybe we don't need platforms. Maybe we don't need other things. But what they don't get is how that ties into the greater goal.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more because I think ultimately, whether it's the written word, whether it's images, video, or audio, um, that content in itself has a specific purpose and it's mapped to a specific person or group. And that's where that relevance comes in, isn't it? And also then that's not enough either. It's got to then map back to, well, how is that helping the company, whether that's scaling internationally, growing revenue, improving profitability, improving customer success scores, etc. And look, I mean, we've got to come back and talk a little bit about content because many people, whether it's people in localization and translation who are just seeing, content growth within their own companies, but a lot of companies that we're talking to, they're producing content at a scale that maybe they haven't been able to produce in the past, and companies are having to balance the speed that you talk about, Semi. They're having to balance speed and quality and compliance and cultural relevance. And, AI, of course, is in the mix on all of that. Um, but how are customers going to manage this balance of things and localize everything across multiple markets? Does that take working with partners like Phrase and VistaTech? Does it take, having the right upskilled person in the team? Because we're seeing a lot of companies as well, maybe laying off people at this moment in time. So how do we balance all this, you know, content growth and everything else that we're trying to balance?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned speed, quality, and then compliance. And that kind of triggered something in my head. It's like not all content is the same either, right? So don't apply one standard to everything. Risk or tier your content based on risk, for example. And I feel like now AI has tools it never had before, to be honest with you. Back then, we gave all this information to human linguists, style guides. This is what you do. Like this is a checklist for you, the linguist, to kind of make sure that like this is our tone. Don't translate this way. Don't say these words. Say these words, whatever it might be. But like we didn't give these things other than obviously machine translation rules and glossaries and things like this. We didn't really AI didn't have that, especially for generative AI. It just went and generated a bunch of content, and then it kept generating new versions each time you tried it. Now, with all the capabilities we have, we are able to give the same style guide, same quality profiles that the humans had to AI. However, look, if it's a legal contract, make sure you run it by someone who's a legal, you know what I mean? It's not even just a translator anymore, it's a legal translator. Or if it's medical content, if it's very, very important, don't keep them in the same exact bucket because they're not. Yes, bad marketing will cause some issues. It could be very bad, right? But at the same time, it's not going to kill somebody, most likely. But in a medical device, yeah, clearly, if a doctor uses it incorrectly in Moldova because it's not in their language and they're reading everything in English and they spent $2 million on this MRI machine, they got to use it. But they don't know all the features and they don't have time to read a 40-page IFU, especially if it's in English. So this is a real story, by the way. A dean of a hospital told me this. We spent all this money of a on these machines, but there's no Romanian, there's no, Moldovan, there's no, our language doesn't exist in there, so it's tough for us. What I'm trying to say is tier the risk models, right? Like understand what goes through what. And, this is where human expertise comes into place, especially like when compliance is important. And I think like regulated environments have their own rules. You got to play within those rules. But game moved past this automated LQA or like, just the gating mechanism. Now we can say, what was the intent here? What are the style guides? Let me have now AI judges that will tell me if this is good or not. And by the way, you can even tell me if I'm the AI agent, right? You can tell me what means good in this context versus that content. Here, good means never, ever, ever deviating from this content. And here it means you can get very creative, just understand the culture, right? Make sure that it's going to land. Those are two completely different scenarios. So, and sometimes you can just have it, flag any outliers in either case.
Yeah, I mean, we see that a lot because obviously we have a fairly large life science division, and in a lot of cases, the regulations demand and insist that you can't just AI everything. You have to have a human expert. It's regulated guidelines. They have to be there. And I think whether it's legal, life sciences, we do a lot in fintech, for example. The regulations are different then, are in different parts of the world, and the audiences are different, and the language are different, and that can get quite tricky quite quickly. So obviously, working with companies that understand that and can make that work is really important. And I wanted to ask you about working with companies and maybe any sort of examples that spring to mind, or any types of businesses that, where they're using AI today and you think it's really transforming their operations, or they're learning lessons from these things, or where are you seeing the most success, Semi, at the moment?
Yeah, we see some patterns. It's very interesting. And I think it depends on which teams we're working with in each organization. But like one pattern, for example, say you're a tech company or a software company, you're drowning in volume. In this particular case, you create this tiered model, as I mentioned earlier. You give it more context, but there's a lot of content and languages, so there's no linear headcount growth, right? Like there's no, now I went from 10 million words to 20 million words, so I'm going to double my localization department. It's the exact opposite direction, sometimes the opposite trend, let's say. So in that case, I think scale comes from workflow design, but not necessarily a better model. Like the model itself might be working, but maybe the workflow itself has too many either checks and balances or too many kind of bottlenecks and too many breaking points. So I feel like having a smoother workflow layer, which again AI can help with, also with the expertise of humans that kind of worked on this content to just adjust the automation, adjust the let's say orchestration, right? Then you're going to kind of go towards a better model. The other pattern that we see is, if you're a gaming company, a media studio, where now the bottleneck is not necessarily the content itself, it's the context, it's the lore, it's the tone, the characters, maybe even characters are translated differently or they have different voices. In fact, one of our esteemed solution architects, Miklos, I'll just call him out by name because I actually did a webinar with him last year. He showed something that was super cool. He said, these are a couple of characters in a game. This is the narrative. And one is this knight, speaks with old archaic proper English, and the other one is this little goblin that lives in the forest and speaks with broken English and stuff like that. Well, how do you keep that authenticity when you translate, especially with AI, right? Now we have some additional tools in our arsenal. We do have a couple of tools now that can say, let me just capture all this intent, the tone, and everything systematically. What that means is this is the voice of this particular character. This is the voice of this other character. Now, systematically, whenever we see these voices, we're going to translate it this way. And we can do that adaptation at scale, no matter how much content there is, because we now know these characters. And that gives us that consistency that we never had before because every time you did a project, you had to kind of adjust and adapt one by one. So I think those are some of the patterns that we're seeing. But I think the common lesson between all these patterns is you capture and operationalize the content. I think that's going to be the key.
That makes me think, Sammy, I don't want to throw a curveball in here, but I want to ask something that I'm very keen to get your view on. Um, a lot of companies have sort of been trying the publicly available models, right? The large language models. They've been working with the models that are available from the large hyperscalers we all have, and they're brilliant in lots of ways. But we're also seeing people look at these VSLMs, these vertical small language models that look
Mhm.
after a particular industry or a particular niche in the marketplace. And I'm just wondering, as you look ahead and you think about the future of global communications and what that looks like, where are you on this scale where will somebody just say, look, they'll just literally talk to uh, a window and say, hey, this is what I want. They'll describe it verbally, and then the AI will just orchestrate away this entire multilingual content life cycle. Or will the human remain at the center of that or in these key areas for successful global engagement? So, where are you on that scale? And are you seeing much in these sort of smaller language models being deployed now for particular industry types?
Yes and no, right? I think smaller language models are key for, let's say, again, those very niche industries, legal, medical, especially within medical. You have so many different, like you have ophthalmology, completely different than, let's say, oncology. And I feel like people will, in fact, see, is there a distilled version of this large language model that I can use that I can really train with this particular type of content and make it maybe more mine too, because I can give it anonymized patient data and maybe upload all of my, case. Yes, I think there's an opportunity there. But when it comes to localization, I am just not sure if that is going to be the direction because companies are being thrown like right now, if you're VistaTech, right, you have so many different types of industries that you're servicing. It's so diverse. If you were to try to create an SML or SLM, sorry, in each area, gosh, that's going to be tough. Like you're going to have one for retail and maybe e-commerce. You're going to have another one for medical, but maybe under medical, there's, in fact, life sciences as an industry is huge. You have healthcare that's completely separate. Think insurance companies and such. You have medical. Then you have, I don't know, biotech, pharma. It's all completely different. So in our industry, I think it's a bigger challenge, especially when you're trying to accommodate a whole different, wide range of customers. Maybe smaller niche language service integrators could have some, success with SLMs, but I would say that's very expensive. It's not easy for them to do. There are tools out there that they can create SLMs with. So we just announced it, right, at Lock World, and that's basically where we're headed. We're headed to a completely headless experience. Even last summer, when I was telling people about this new AI agent that we have, the translation agent that can translate with all these different things in mind, and then finish the translation, go back and look at the output and optimize the output and all these things. I had customers that were saying, look, that's all fine and great, but we still want that granular control. We still want our orchestrator workflows and this and that. And that was mind boggling for me because I'm like, wouldn't you want this to be much easier? Here's an analogy I use sometimes. If I want to clean this room now, I just want to have some Roomba-like robot, right? And I just say, clean. I don't want to talk about this is how you got to do the corners, this is how you do it. I just want to say clean because that's what I paid for. But let's say it's round and the corner is like this and it just can't reach that corner and there's a lot of dirt there. Now I have to come back with a sweeper and clean after it. My goal now is to say clean. I don't care what tool you use. This thing then looks at it and sees that corner and says, ooh, I'm not going to get there with this tool, and goes back and gets the square tool and now gets into the corner and sweeps that up too. It's like, let me clean this. Let me look at the result. Let me go back and optimize, right? That's so 2025 though. 2026 now is I just want to describe what I'm trying to do in a chat-like environment. I just tried this out, by the way. Our product team has put up something, and we're kind of doing this early access thing with some customers. But I just said, look, I want to translate this video with this context in mind. Maybe it's a reality show, maybe it's whatever, maybe it's a gaming trailer. But I also want you to think about these things. It literally went back and found all these tools within the platform and said, oh, okay, it sounds like I can do this, and it set up an orchestrated workflow for me. I never want to go into the orchestrator. No offense, it's a great product if you're technical. I'm not technical. I don't want to do it. I'm just saying I can be technical from time to time. I just don't, I choose not to, right? So I think that's the future. I think people are literally just going to describe, here's a marketing campaign. This is my audience. This is my intent. This is what's key for us as a corporation. This is the, I don't know, budget requirements. This is where the data needs to sit. Say all of that and say no more. That's it. It knows what glossaries, what style guides, it knows what TMs, it knows what workflows and what tools to use. So that again, just in my beginning, example, maybe you won't go sleep, maybe you'll take a meeting, maybe you'll do something else, but this is all working in the background happening for you. I think that's where we're headed.
Well, that's a great point to end on, and I suppose for anybody who's interested, not really I'm not advertising the sales pitch here, but that's why great companies like Phrase and VistaTech work together because that's available to a lot of our customers, in an ecosystem type environment where you can sort of pull in and pull out what you need, what you don't need. And it's great to be working with people that understand this too. So, Semi, thanks so much for being on Vista Talks today. I know we packed a lot in there in the short time we've been together. We must come back and do another one of these as we
Absolutely. It
do.
was my
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's been great. I'm just going to ask our audience who've been watching or joining us, listening or watching this episode, to make sure they pop back and see what else we're doing here with Vista Talks, where once again I'll be getting some great people like Semi who come along and share their ideas and help you build your business outcomes that you're looking for. So thanks so much indeed for your time. Thanks for watching. Come back and check it all out. And Semi, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much.